the support they need. These are not just abstract concepts or distant problems. They are realities that many face every single day, just steps from where we stand. The room fell silent as Melania's voice took on a sincerity that hadn't been present at the start. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the audience before continuing. We can't solve these problems overnight, and I know that charity alone is not the solution. But we can make a difference, by showing compassion, by listening, and by committing to real change. Today is a reminder of the work we still need to do, together. A ripple of applause spread through the room, but Melania barely registered it. Her mind was still on Poppy, her father, and the countless others like them who were fighting battles far removed from the polished walls of this event. After concluding her speech, she stepped off the stage to mingle with attendees, her smile in place but her thoughts far away. Claire was by her side, whispering reminders about the schedule, but Melania barely heard her. Instead, she found herself gravitating toward a group of local volunteers. "You're the ones making the real impact here," she said earnestly. "How can I help you beyond today? What do you need to keep doing this vital work?" The volunteers exchanged surprised glances before one of them spoke up. "Funding is always an issue," he said. "And awareness. People don't realize how many children and families are struggling right in their own neighborhoods." Melania nodded thoughtfully. "I'll see what I can do to bring more attention to your efforts." As the event wrapped up and Melania prepared to leave, she made a point to seek out the organizers. She asked detailed questions about their programs, took notes, and even exchanged contact information with a few of them. It was a departure from the usual fleeting appearances she had grown accustomed to. Back in the limousine, as the car began its journey to the next event, Melania stared out the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkening streets. She thought of Poppy, her dirt-smudged face and wide, hopeful eyes, and made a silent promise to herself. This couldn't just be another event. It had to mean something. "Claire," she said, breaking the silence, "cancel my next engagement. I want to spend more time here." Claire looked startled. "But Mrs. Trump, the schedule—" "I don't care about the schedule," Melania interrupted, her voice firm but calm. "These people deserve more than just a fleeting moment. If we're going to help, we need to start by truly understanding their needs." Claire hesitated but then nodded, pulling out her tablet to make the necessary adjustments. For the first time in a long time, Melania felt something stir within her, a sense of purpose that went beyond the polished speeches and orchestrated photo ops. As the limousine glided through the streets, she resolved to follow through on her promise, not just to Poppy, but to herself. The support they need. These are not just abstract concepts or distant problems. They are realities that many face every single day, just steps from where we stand. The room fell silent as Melania's voice took on a sincerity that hadn't been present at the start. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the audience before continuing. "We can't solve these problems overnight, and I know that charity alone is not the solution. But we can make a difference, by showing compassion, by listening, and by committing to real change. Today is a reminder of the work we still need to do, together." A ripple of applause spread through the room, but Melania barely registered it. Her mind was still on Poppy, her father, and the countless others like them who were fighting battles far removed from the polished walls of this event. After concluding her speech, she stepped off the stage to mingle with attendees, her smile in place but her thoughts far away. Claire was by her side, whispering reminders about the schedule, but Melania barely heard her. Instead, she found herself gravitating toward a group of local volunteers. "You're the ones making the real impact here," she said earnestly. "How can I help you beyond today? What do you need to keep doing this vital work?" The volunteers exchanged surprised glances before one of them spoke up. Funding is always an issue, he said. And awareness. People don't realize how many children and families are struggling right in their own neighborhoods. Melania nodded thoughtfully. I'll see what I can do to bring more attention to your efforts. As the event wrapped up and Melania prepared to leave, she made a point to seek out the organizers. She asked detailed questions about their programs, took notes, and even exchanged contact information with a few of them. It was a departure from the usual fleeting appearances she had grown accustomed to. Back in the limousine, as the car began its journey to the next event, Melania stared out the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkening streets. She thought of Poppy, her dirt-smudged face and wide, hopeful eyes, and made a silent promise to herself. This couldn't just be another event. It had to mean something. Claire, she said, breaking the silence, cancel my next engagement. I want to spend more time here. Claire looked startled. But Mrs. Trump, the schedule. I don't care about the schedule, Melania interrupted, her voice firm but calm. These people deserve more than just a fleeting moment. If we're going to help, we need to start by truly understanding their needs. Claire hesitated but then nodded, pulling out her tablet to make the necessary adjustments. For the first time in a long time, Melania felt something stir within her, a sense of purpose that went beyond the polished speeches and orchestrated photo ops. As the limousine glided through the streets, she resolved to follow through on her promise, not just to Poppy, but to herself. Stood directly in its path, arms outstretched, blocking the vehicle's escape. Her small figure seemed impossibly brave amidst the chaos around her. The Secret Service agents, now struggling to contain the protesters, yelled for her to move, but Poppy didn't budge. "Please don't drive," she cried, her voice breaking. Melania's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. Against Claire's protests and the chauffeur's insistence, she reached for the door handle. "Stop the car," she commanded firmly. "Mrs. Trump, this is highly dangerous," Agent Stevens began, but Melania had already opened the door, stepping out into the sweltering Texas heat. She approached Poppy slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. The girl's chest heaved as she fought back tears. "What's wrong, Poppy?" Melania asked gently, kneeling down to meet her eye level. "They're going to hurt him," Poppy blurted, pointing toward the alley where her father had been sleeping. "I saw them. They're trying to chase him away because he has nowhere to go." Melania followed the direction of Poppy's trembling hand. In the distance, a few figures loomed near the alley, shouting at someone unseen. The tension in the air was palpable. "Agent Stevens," Melania called, her voice calm but resolute. "Please, check the alley and ensure this man is safe." "Ma'am, our priority is your safety," he replied, frustration edging his tone. "And my safety includes knowing this child's father isn't in danger," she countered, her gaze unwavering. Stevens hesitated, then nodded, signaling for two agents to investigate. Moments later, they returned with a disheveled man who clutched a tattered blanket. His eyes darted nervously between the agents and the protesters still being restrained nearby. Poppy ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Papa!" The man knelt to hug her back, his eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. Melania felt a lump rise in her throat. "Is he okay?" she asked the agents. "Yes, ma'am," one replied. "Just shaken up." Melania turned to Claire. "Get their information. I want to ensure they have access to shelter and resources tonight." Claire nodded, pulling out her tablet. The protesters, now subdued, watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. As the chaos settled, Melania walked back to the car. Before getting in, she looked back at Poppy and her father. "Take care of her," she said softly to the man. He nodded, his voice trembling. "Thank you, ma'am." Thank you. As the limousine finally pulled away, Melania's thoughts were heavy. The image of Poppy standing fearlessly in front of the car stayed with her, a reminder of the courage and desperation that often go unseen in polished events and rehearsed speeches. For the first time, Melania felt a deep resolve to bridge the gap between words and action, to ensure that moments like this led to meaningful change. Poppy glanced around nervously, her gaze darting to the agents still securing the area and the car with the damaged tire. Finally, she looked back at Melania, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know them," she said. "Not really. But I've seen them before. They hang around where my dad and I sleep. They don't like people like you," she added hesitantly, her eyes dropping to the ground. "People like me?" Melania asked softly, her voice free of judgment, encouraging the girl to continue. Poppy nodded. "They say rich people don't care, that you only show up to pretend to help so people will like you." Her voice trembled, and she quickly added, "But I didn't believe them. You helped me and gave me money for food. I knew you weren't like that." Melania felt a pang in her chest. Poppy's words, spoken with such innocent conviction, felt both like a reassurance and a challenge. "Thank you for trusting me," Melania said, reaching out to lightly touch Poppy's shoulder. "And for being so brave today. You didn't just protect me. You showed us all what real courage looks like." Poppy's face brightened slightly at the praise, but her expression quickly turned serious again. "Are you still going to leave now?" she asked, her voice small. Melania hesitated, glancing back at Claire, who was already consulting with the agents about the new security arrangements. "Not yet," she said, her decision firm. "First, we need to make sure you and your father are safe." Turning to Claire, Melania spoke with newfound determination. "I want them placed in a shelter tonight, one that's safe and comfortable, and I want follow-up arrangements made to ensure they have the support they need." "Mrs. Trump," Claire began, her voice tinged with caution, "this area is still unsecured, and your schedule—" "My schedule can wait," Melania interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Claire nodded reluctantly and set to work making calls. Meanwhile, Melania knelt back down beside Poppy. "Where is your father now?" she asked. Poppy pointed toward the alley, where two agents had already started speaking with the man. He looked tired and weary, but relieved to see his daughter was unharmed. As arrangements were made to transport Poppy and her father to a nearby shelter, Melania stayed close to the girl, speaking to her softly and offering reassurances. Despite the chaotic turn of events, she felt an unshakable sense of purpose. This moment, raw, unplanned, and deeply human, was more impactful than any speech she could deliver or photo she could pose for, and it reminded her that sometimes the most meaningful actions happen not in grand gestures, but in small, sincere acts of kindness. "Your father will be safe, I promise." Agent Stevens stepped forward, his demeanor more composed but resolute. "We'll need to move quickly. If what Poppy says is accurate, this Mike and others in the group could pose a significant threat, not just to them, but to anyone in the vicinity." Melania turned to Claire, who was already making notes on her phone. "Claire, contact the local authorities and arrange for secure transportation to a safe location for Poppy and her father. We'll also need to coordinate with social services to ensure they have long-term support." Claire hesitated. "Mrs. Trump, this will require significant coordination, and it might delay your schedule." "I don't care about the schedule," Melania interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This is more important." Poppy's face brightened slightly, but the fear in her eyes remained. "Will you come with us? Just until we're safe?" she asked. Melania knelt again, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "I'll stay with you as long as I can," she said softly. "You're not alone in this." Agent Stevens spoke into his wrist mic, directing his team to secure the perimeter and locate Mike. Meanwhile, Claire arranged for a car to transport Poppy and her father to a secure location. As the group began to move, Poppy clung to Melania's hand, her small frame trembling. The fear and trust in her eyes strengthened Melania's resolve. The group reached the alley where Poppy's father sat, leaning against a crumbling brick wall. He looked up warily as they approached, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief as he spotted Poppy. "Dad!" she cried, running to him. He caught her in a tight embrace, his weathered face softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Melania approached them, her presence commanding but gentle. "Sir," she said, "your daughter has shown incredible courage today. We're here to ensure both of you are safe." The man looked at her, his skepticism fading into gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice breaking. As law enforcement arrived, Poppy and her father were escorted into a waiting vehicle. Melania stood by, watching as they were driven away to safety. Despite the chaos of the day, she felt a sense of purpose and clarity. Looking to Claire, she said quietly, "Make sure they have everything they need, not just for tonight, but for the future." Claire nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Trump." As Melania returned to her own vehicle, she glanced back at the now empty alley. The experience had been harrowing, but it had also been eye-opening. Sometimes, she murmured to herself, the smallest voices remind us of what truly matters. Relief. "Promise," she whispered, her voice trembling. Melania placed her hands gently on Poppy's shoulders, looking into her eyes. "I promise," she said firmly. "You and your father are not alone anymore. We'll make sure you're both safe." Agent Stevens approached, his face still etched with concern. "Mrs. Trump, the individuals apprehended are being transported for questioning. We've also arranged for Poppy and her father to be moved to a secure location under protective custody." Melania nodded. "Good. And ensure that social services are involved. They need more than safety. They need a chance at a better life." Stevens hesitated for a moment, then added, "Ma'am, the threats made by Mike shouldn't be taken lightly. This group might have more members, and they could target you or Poppy again." Melania's expression hardened. "Then we'll be prepared. But I won't abandon them." Claire, standing nearby, spoke up. "Mrs. Trump, the press is already catching wind of what's happened. Do you want us to release a statement?" Melania thought for a moment before responding. "Not yet. This isn't about publicity. Focus on ensuring their safety first. We'll address everything else later." As the scene cleared and Poppy and her father were escorted to a waiting vehicle, Poppy turned back to Melania. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but sincere. Melania gave her a warm smile. "You're brave, Poppy. Don't ever forget that." As the car pulled away, Melania stood in the fading light of the day, her thoughts heavy. The events of the afternoon had shaken her, but also ignited a new sense of purpose. Turning to Claire and Agent Stevens, she said, "This isn't just about today. We need to address the root causes of what brought Poppy and her father to this point. Let's start by ensuring they have a future, and then we'll work on helping others like them." Claire nodded, already typing on her tablet. "I'll coordinate with the necessary agencies. This might take time, but we can make it happen." As they headed back to their car, Melania cast one last glance at the alley. It had been a place of danger and despair, but also of courage and hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly connected to the purpose of her role. This was more than an official duty. It was a chance to make a difference, and she was determined not to let it slip away. The group found us. They offered food, shelter, and a sense of purpose, even if their message was twisted. I didn't agree with everything they said, but I was desperate. I thought it was the only way to keep Poppy safe. His voice broke, and he looked down, ashamed. Poppy, standing close to Melania, reached out and touched her father's arm. "Dad, it's okay. They're here to help us." Melania knelt beside James, her voice steady but full of compassion. "Mr. Carter, no one can fully understand what you've been through. But today, your daughter showed incredible courage and kindness. She saved lives, including mine. Let us help you both now." James hesitated, torn between pride and the humiliation of his circumstances. Finally, he nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect Poppy. If that means cooperating with you, I will." Agent Stevens stepped forward, offering James a firm but understanding look. "We'll ensure your safety and help you start fresh. But we'll need your full cooperation in dismantling this group and preventing them from harming anyone else." James glanced at Poppy, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. "All right," he said. "You have my word." Melania stood, offering her hand to James. He took it, his grip firm despite the weariness etched into his features. As the team began making arrangements to relocate James and Poppy to a secure location, Melania felt a sense of clarity and purpose she hadn't experienced in a long time. This wasn't about photo ops or surface-level charity. It was about genuine connection and making a tangible difference. Walking back through the alley with Poppy and James by her side, Melania couldn't help but feel that this day had irrevocably changed her perspective. She wasn't just the First Lady of the United States. She was someone who had the power to truly help those in need, and she intended to do just that. Poppy exchanged a quiet moment together. James held Poppy tightly, his face a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope. Melania stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. "This won't be easy, Mr. Carter, but you've already taken the hardest step, choosing to move forward. We'll do everything we can to support you both." James met her gaze, his skepticism giving way to gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Trump, for not just walking away, for seeing us." Poppy looked up at Melania with wide eyes, a faint smile breaking through the tension on her face. "Does this mean we'll have a real home?" Melania crouched down, her expression softening. "Yes, Poppy, a real home, and a chance to go to school, make friends, and just be a kid." As the agents loaded James's and Poppy's few belongings into a waiting vehicle, Melania turned to her assistant, CLA. "Please, follow up with the shelter. I want regular updates on their progress, and let's make sure they have everything they need." CLA nodded, a rare smile crossing her face. "Of course, ma'am." Before stepping into the car, James paused, looking back at Melania. "You could have just driven away today. But you didn't. I'll never forget that." Melania smiled warmly. "It was your daughter who made sure none of us drove away. She's the real hero today." With that, James and Poppy climbed into the car, their faces illuminated by a glimmer of hope as the door closed. The vehicle pulled away, and Melania stood watching until it disappeared from view. As she turned to leave the alley, Agent Stevens approached. "Mrs. Trump, that was quite a risk you took today. But it made a difference." Melania nodded, her gaze distant as she processed the day's events. "Sometimes, doing what's right means taking risks, Agent Stevens. And today, it was worth it." Walking back to her own vehicle, her dust-streaked dress and smudged shoes bore testimony to the day's trials. But for the first time in a long while, Melania felt a profound sense of purpose, a reminder that even small acts of compassion could ripple outwards and change lives. "I have been involved with it for years, ensuring that it has the resources and programs veterans need to rebuild their lives," she explained. It's more than just a place to stay. It's a support system, a community. Poppy's eyes brightened at the mention of tutoring. So I can go to school like other kids? Not just stay home, she asked, her voice filled with hope. Yes, exactly, Melania replied, her smile warm. You'll have the chance to catch up, make new friends, and learn things you enjoy. It's a place for you to grow, Poppy. James looked at his daughter, his face softening. You hear that, kiddo, he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. A real chance for you. Poppy nodded, a small but genuine smile spreading across her face. The car continued its journey, leaving behind the streets of Houston that had been a constant reminder of their struggles. As they approached the shelter, Melania could see the beginnings of hope taking root in the Carter family. Once the vehicle stopped in front of the shelter, a staff member greeted them warmly and began to show them around. Melania remained close by, ensuring everything went smoothly, her heart swelling with satisfaction. She was helping to create a new beginning for this family. After touring the facility, James and Poppy were settled into their new living space, a small but comfortable room equipped with all the essentials. Poppy immediately flopped onto the bed, a look of pure relief on her face. This is so much better than the tent, she said, kicking off her shoes and wiggling her toes. Melania chuckled softly, her eyes meeting James's. I'm glad you both have found a safe place to stay. This is just the first step. There's much more ahead for you, for both of you. James gave her a sincere nod. Thank you, Mrs. Trump. I don't know how we would have made it out of that mess without your help. Melania smiled. You've both made it through the hardest part. Now it's time to look forward to what's next. As she turned to leave, the weight of the day settled on her. It had started as just another appearance, but it had evolved into something far more meaningful, an opportunity to make a real impact. The ripple effect of her actions had already begun, and Melania knew she had only just begun to scratch the surface of the change she could help bring. Melania's resolve solidified as the car continued down the streets of Houston, the weight of the day and its profound impact settling in. She was no longer just the First Lady. She was a beacon of change, driven by a mission to make a lasting difference. The Carter family's journey from the alley to their new home had symbolized something far bigger than just a rescue. It was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassionate action. Melania's actions had made a tangible difference in their lives, and in doing so, it had sparked something within her. The day had shown her the true potential of her position, not as a figurehead or a symbol of privilege, but as a force for real, positive change. As the vehicle moved toward the White House, her mind raced with ideas. The program she envisioned, aimed at helping homeless veterans and their families, would be a testament to the power of empathy, and the vision she now carried could extend far beyond one family. With a clear purpose, she began to imagine initiatives that would uplift entire communities, giving them the tools and resources to rebuild their lives. The road ahead was not simple, but it was one Melania was now ready to take. She could no longer simply witness the struggles of others. She had to act, to make an impact that would transcend the fleeting moments of a photo op. Today, she had seen firsthand how small acts of kindness, when supported by strong initiatives, could transform lives. As the car pulled up to the White House, she took a deep breath, ready for the next chapter. This is just the beginning, she whispered to herself, knowing that the change she was determined to create had already started. Melania Trump, more than ever, understood the power of one life, one family, and one action at a time.